He saved Keanu Reeves' life and vanished without a name. Decades later, Keanu buys a struggling toy store in a forgotten town, only to lock eyes with the boy who once pulled him from a wreck. But the young man doesn't recognize him. And what Keanu does next will change both their lives forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was the kind of town most people drove through without stopping. Faded signs, a cracked main street, and a silence that settled like dust over everything. But that's exactly why Keanu Reeves had come. He wore a gray hoodie and sunglasses, trying to disappear, as he always did when he needed quiet. The town didn't recognize him, not yet. And he liked it that way. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: simplicity. At the corner of the main street stood a toy store, old, narrow, and crumbling at the edges. The window display looked like it hadn't changed in 20 years. A faded rocking horse, a couple of plush bears, and a crooked sign that read, "Callahan's Toys, where imagination begins." The bell above the door jingled faintly when Keanu stepped inside. It was like walking into a memory. The air smelled like cardboard, old wood, and the faint echo of laughter that hadn't been heard in years. Shelves lined with forgotten puzzles, wooden trains, and tin wind-up robots stood like relics from another world. Behind the counter was a man in his 70s. He wore a sweater vest and a name tag that simply said Frank. His eyes were tired but kind. "Help you?" he asked, voice soft but cautious. Keanu smiled politely. "Just looking." Frank nodded, as if he'd heard that 100 times. "Not much left to see. We're closing at the end of the month." Keanu turned slowly, scanning the place again. "How long have you been here?" Frank chuckled, then sighed. 52 years. My father started it, back when this town still had 2 schools, a bakery, and a future. Keanu walked to a shelf and picked up a box labeled Space Explorers. The edges were worn, but the art on the front showed 3 kids in cardboard helmets, blasting off into imagination. "Used to be packed on Saturdays," Frank said behind him. "Birthday parties, school trips. Folks would come from the next town just to buy holiday gifts." Keanu set the box down gently. "What happened?" Frank leaned on the counter. "Walmart. Amazon. People stopped needing a place like this." Keanu nodded, letting the silence stretch. He understood, maybe more than Frank realized. "How much are you asking?" he said suddenly. Frank blinked. "For the toy?" "No, for the store." There was a pause, a long one. "You're not serious," Frank said slowly. Keanu didn't flinch. "I don't need it to make money. I just don't want it to disappear." Frank studied him, trying to place the man in front of him. There was something familiar about him. Something still and centered, like someone who'd been through fire and come out softer, not harder. "You want to buy a failing toy store in a failing town?" Keanu looked around the shop again. Not for what it is today, for what it used to mean. Frank didn't respond right away. He reached below the counter and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a group of kids crowded around a puppet stage, their eyes wide with joy. Behind them stood a younger Frank, grinning, holding a wooden marionette above their heads. The store had once pulsed with life. "I used to think this place had a soul," he said, almost to himself. Keanu took the photo gently, studied it, then handed it back. "It still does. It's just waiting to be noticed again." Frank's eyes glistened, but he masked it with a cough. "You sure about this? Town council would have to sign off. Building needs work. Plumbing's a disaster. No one comes in here anymore." "I'm not worried about traffic," Keanu said. "I'm worried about meaning." Frank studied him again. There was something strange about the way this man talked, like he wasn't just talking about toys or sales, like he was carrying something deeper, something invisible, but heavy. "I don't have a lawyer," Frank said. "Can't promise the paperwork will be clean." "I'll take care of everything," Keanu said simply. Frank raised an eyebrow. You got a name? Keanu paused. John, he said. Just John. It wasn't exactly a lie. It was the name people used when they didn't want to say Keanu. It gave him space to breathe, to move quietly. Frank extended his hand. Well, John, if you're sure, I'll call the council. Keanu took it. Let's save something. Outside, the clouds were starting to break. A beam of light fell across the sign above the shop. Keanu turned to look at it. The letters were chipped, the paint peeling, but something about it held, like memory itself, refusing to be erased. That night, Keanu checked into a tiny motel 2 blocks away. The receptionist didn't recognize him either, or if she did, she said nothing, just handed him a key and a Wi-Fi password written in pen on a paper napkin. He lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the store, about its dust, its silence, and how it felt like more than a building. It felt like a chance. He opened his laptop and began making notes. Renovation plans, new signage ideas, a small reading corner for local kids, maybe even a monthly story hour. He didn't want it flashy, he wanted it real. He called his business manager and gave instructions. Set up a trust, use an LLC, keep my name out of it. The manager didn't ask questions. He was used to this side of Keanu, the side that moved in shadows, helped in silence, and walked away when the light got too bright. By midnight, the wheels were already turning. The sale was unofficial, but the intent was real. Callahan's toys wouldn't vanish. Not yet. In a world racing forward, Keanu had found something worth holding still. The next morning, the town square was still quiet when Keanu walked back to the toy store. Frank was already there, fiddling with the doorframe, trying to jiggle it open without the key sticking. I've been meaning to fix that for 10 years, Frank muttered with a smile. Keanu chuckled and held up a coffee he brought for him. Frank took it, nodding with gratitude. Inside, the place was just as dusty and dim, but today it felt different. Intent changes energy, and now, something had shifted. Keanu noticed a child's crayon drawing taped to the side of the counter. A picture of the store, with big, happy windows and stick figures waving from inside. Frank noticed him looking. A girl drew that maybe 8-9 years ago. Her dad lost his job. They couldn't afford gifts that Christmas. So I told her to take any one toy she wanted. She gave me that drawing in return. Keanu studied the child's handwriting in the corner. Thank you for making us smile, it read. Frank blinked. Funny, huh? I thought I'd frame it. Never did. Keanu smiled. We'll frame it now. They spent the next few hours walking through every aisle. Frank showed him old ledger books, stock rooms stacked with forgotten inventory, and a tiny office in the back filled with shipping labels, curled up Polaroids, and a calendar that hadn't been changed in years. Keanu took photos, scribbled notes, and asked more questions than Frank had been asked in a decade. He wasn't just buying a building, he was recovering a story. By the time the town council held an emergency meeting that afternoon, word had already spread that someone wanted to save Callahan's toys. No one knew the buyer's identity. Some guessed an out-of-state investor, others hoped it was a nostalgic former resident. No one imagined it was a global movie star walking among them in boots and flannel. Keanu didn't attend the meeting. He let Frank speak for him. Later that night, Frank called. It's done. They approved the sale. Unanimous vote. They even waived the inspection fees. Keanu nodded on the other end of the line. Thanks, Frank. Let's get to work. The next morning, Keanu stood alone inside the toy store. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. The shelves were still empty, the register still broken. But to him, it looked like the beginning. He took out a small notebook and scribbled a name on the first page. The Store of Second Chances. He hadn't decided if that would be the real name yet, but something about it felt right. Because that's what this place was about now. Not just toys, not just nostalgia. It was about what could be saved before it was too late. And neither he nor this town, had any idea just how personal that second chance was about to become. The mornings began with the sound of a hammer and the scent of sawdust. Keanu was usually the first to arrive, unlocking the toy store before the sun had fully crested the hills. He wore a plain hoodie, baseball cap low over his eyes, and jeans that had seen better days. To anyone passing by, he looked like a quiet contractor, doing repairs on a building too forgotten to matter. But inside, every detail was intentional. He began by stripping the old carpet, revealing the wood floors underneath. Scuffed, yes, but still strong. He spent hours sanding them down, breathing in the years they had absorbed. He didn't talk much. Music played low in the background, mostly instrumental jazz or soft acoustic guitar. It kept him focused. The shelves, which once held dolls, model trains, puzzles, and storybooks, were cleaned and repaired. Some were so warped from age that he called in a local woodworker named Eli to help restore them. Eli was in his 60s and had built cabinets in town for decades. When Keanu introduced himself as John, the man shrugged and said, "I don't care what you're called, long as you pay fair and don't micromanage." That worked just fine. They worked side by side for days, sanding, planing, rebuilding. At first, Eli kept to himself, but after a while, curiosity won out. "You from around here?" Eli asked one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. Keanu paused. "Not really. Must have had a reason to buy this place." Keanu looked around the store, now brighter, cleaner, more alive. Let's just say it left an impression. Eli didn't press. In small towns, silence was a form of respect. Meanwhile, rumors floated around the community like dust in the morning light. Someone had bought Callahan's toys, but no one knew who. People peered through the windows, watching the quiet transformation unfold. A few brave souls knocked on the door. Keanu never answered. He kept to the back room, which he had converted into a small living space. A cot, a kettle, a notebook filled with sketches for future displays and lists of classic toys he wanted to bring back. He avoided emails. He turned down meetings in LA. His phone stayed face down on a crate near the wall, buzzing only occasionally. Each night, when the work was done and Eli had gone home, Keanu sat alone with a single photograph. He kept it tucked in a book on the back shelf. But every evening, he pulled it out. It showed him 20 years younger, soaked from the rain, kneeling next to a boy with a flashlight. The boy was smiling. Keanu was not. He had never shown that photo to anyone. He had never spoken about that night, not even in interviews. But that image had haunted him for 2 decades. And now, for reasons he hadn't yet admitted out loud, it had brought him back here. By the second week, whispers turned to quiet excitement. Locals passing by began leaving notes taped to the door, messages scrawled in hopeful handwriting. "Thank you for not letting this place die. My dad bought my first baseball glove here in '87. We thought no one remembered." Keanu read each one in silence. He never replied, but he kept the notes. Some he tucked into a box marked "Stories," and others he pinned to a board near the cash register. To him, it wasn't just a renovation, it was restoration, not just of the store, but of the town's belief in its own story. One rainy evening, as the storm tapped lightly on the windows, Keanu was kneeling beside a shelf, fixing a splintered corner, when he heard the bell over the door ring. He looked up, startled. No one was supposed to come in. A teenage girl stood in the entryway, holding a brown paper bag wrapped tight at the top. She wore a rain jacket and scuffed sneakers, her face partially hidden under a hoodie. Her hands were trembling. "I heard someone bought the place," she said, glancing around nervously. Is Mr. Callahan here?" Keanu stood slowly, dust on his hands. "Not anymore. He retired." "Oh," she said softly, visibly disappointed. Keanu didn't introduce himself. He didn't want to complicate things. "Did you need something from the store?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then held up the bag. This was my brother's. He passed last year. This was his favorite place when we were kids. He used to hide drawings inside the walls." Her voice cracked slightly. "I just wanted to leave something for him." Keanu's breath caught. He stepped forward and took the bag from her carefully. "I'll find the perfect spot." She gave a small, grateful nod, then turned and ran out into the rain before he could say more. That night, Keanu sat in the back room and opened the bag. Inside was a folded drawing on aged paper. It was of the store, Callahan's Toys, but in the background, a boy stood holding a flashlight in one hand and in the other a man, faceless but familiar. Underneath, in red crayon, the boy had written, "The night I wasn't alone." Keanu felt the wind leave his lungs. It wasn't just a coincidence. This was him. This was that boy, the one who had found him broken down near the woods 2 decades ago, the one who led him through rain and darkness with nothing but a flashlight and a smile, the one who disappeared before Keanu could say thank you. He closed his eyes, clutching the drawing to his chest. Now he understood. The toy store wasn't just where that boy had played. It was where he had once saved a life. And Keanu had just walked back into the very place where it all began. The next morning, the rain had cleared, but Keanu's mind was still storming. He couldn't stop thinking about the drawing, the boy, the flashlight. That night had been buried deep. Until now. Until this store. Until that message drawn in crayon, reminding him that once, a stranger had found him when he didn't know he was lost. Keanu placed the drawing inside a small wooden frame. He hung it behind the counter, above a shelf of miniature race cars where no one would question its presence. But he would see it, and he would remember why he was here. The renovations continued with quiet urgency. He brought in a retired electrician to rewire the old ceiling fans, and a young woman named Lila to repaint the faded mural near the back wall, a scene of children playing under a summer sky, long cracked and faded from time. Lila didn't ask who was funding it all. She just worked with care, humming softly as she painted life back into forgotten smiles. "Where may this store?" she asked once during a break. Keanu glanced at her, brushing dust off a crate of board games. "Because some things deserve to be remembered." She nodded, not pressing further. By the end of the 3rd week, the shelves were fully restored and the aisles organized. Classic toys had returned: wooden tops, handmade rag dolls, puzzles, and Lionel trains. Everything was arranged with a sense of warmth, like the store had never closed, only slept for a while. At night, Keanu walked through the store with a small notepad, making notes. He didn't want it to feel polished or corporate. He wanted it to feel real, like the kind of place a lonely kid could come and forget they were alone. He scribbled, "Keep bell on door. Leave space near front window for storytelling corner. Keep prices affordable. Remember why." Then he added something new. "If the boy ever walks in, know him." Keanu stood for a long moment in the center of the store. The shelves glowed softly in the dim light. The mural now shone with color. The faint scent of cinnamon from a new batch of old-fashioned candy sticks floated through the air. It felt like a place that mattered again. It felt like healing. And in that stillness, Keanu understood what had drawn him here. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't guilt. It was the quiet promise he'd made to himself that rainy night, when a boy with a flashlight guided him through the dark. He hadn't known how to say thank you then, but he would now, not with words, but with every wooden block sanded, every memory preserved, every child who walked through the door and felt seen. The store wasn't just his. It was theirs, and it was ready. It had started like any other night on set. The rain was relentless, tapping against the windshield like fingers drumming in panic. Keanu had finished a long shoot in the woods outside the small mountain town and decided to drive himself back to the inn rather than wait for the studio shuttle. It wasn't recklessness. He just needed the quiet. but the roads weren't quiet. They were slick, narrow, and winding. Fog rolled in low over the pavement. The mountains loomed like shadows with no faces. His headlights barely pierced the mist. Then it happened. A deer bolted across the road. Keanu swerved hard to the right. His tires lost grip on the edge of the wet gravel. Time seemed to slow just long enough for him to see the drop, and then the car plunged. Branches slapped the windshield as the vehicle crashed through the tree line, flipping once, maybe twice. Keanu's head hit the window. The world blurred, and then there was nothing but rain and blackness. When he opened his eyes, it wasn't to sirens. It was to silence and a flashlight. A single beam of light hovered near the shattered glass of the passenger window. Keanu tried to speak, but pain screamed through his chest. He could barely move. Then, through the broken door, a hand reached in. Small, young, steady. The boy's voice was soft but firm. "You're okay. I've got you." Keanu couldn't make out his face. The rain poured so hard it seemed to wash the world away. But he remembered the grip, the certainty. The flashlight shaking, just a little. The boy somehow pulled him through the wreckage, dragging him up a muddy slope to the edge of the road. Keanu faded in and out, but he remembered one clear thing: the boy taking off his coat, wrapping it around him, then running off into the storm. By the time the paramedics arrived, there was no boy, just tire tracks, broken branches, and a single flashlight left on the ground beside him. Keanu had tried for years to find him. Police reports turned up nothing. Locals claimed they hadn't seen anything unusual that night. No name, no address, no witnesses. But Keanu never forgot that single beam of light in the dark. That moment when everything could have ended, but didn't. Over the years, he hired private investigators, reviewed nearby school records, even searched social media in hopes of finding a face that matched the memory. Nothing ever came. Until months ago. While filming in New Mexico, he passed through a town that felt familiar. Something in the hills, in the angles of the roads, in the air itself. He checked the hospital report again, the GPS coordinates, the map markers from that night. And it hit him. This was the town, the one where the boy vanished. And just like that, Keanu knew. He couldn't forget that night. And he wouldn't leave without saying thank you. Keanu hadn't told anyone, not even his assistant, why he'd come to the town of Fairgrove. He let them assume he was taking a personal break. In a way, he was, but the truth was heavier, older. It lived in the corner of his memory, in that flicker of a flashlight cutting through rain, in the way the air smelled like wet pine and second chances. When he walked the streets of Fairgrove, everything felt suspended in time. The hardware store still had a tin cash register. The gas station used flip numbers on its price sign. And the toy store, Callahan's Toys, stood like a monument to the past, even in its fading glory. Keanu didn't come to act. He came to remember. He retraced old routes, even though he couldn't fully trust the flashbacks. The accident site was somewhere just beyond the edge of town, near a curved overlook that dipped into forest. Locals had since installed a small guardrail. A faded cross stood nearby. He didn't know if it marked another accident or just served as a warning. That first evening, he stood at that overlook for over an hour. No cameras, no security. Just him and the wind. He watched the tree line sway gently, the same trees that once broke his fall. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to whisper, "Thank you." He didn't know if the boy was still alive, or if he even remembered what happened. But if there was even a chance that he still lived in Fairgrove, Keanu was staying. And that meant doing something quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal. He bought the toy store. It wasn't just because it was on sale or because Mr. Callahan was retiring. Keanu chose it because it had a story, the kind of story a boy might be part of. The kind of place a kid who loved flashlights and raincoats might have visited once upon a time. Mr. Callahan had looked surprised when the offer came through. An anonymous buyer, no negotiation, full asking price. Keanu made sure the paperwork went through a trusted agent. No one in town needed to know who the new owner was. Not yet. Instead, he began quietly restoring it. He worked late into the night with local tradesmen and vintage restorers, keeping a low profile. No one suspected that the man with the baseball cap and worn jeans sweeping the back room was the same man who'd stood on red carpets and made history on movie screens. But while others were restoring shelves, polishing displays, and repairing toy trains, Keanu was watching. Faces, names, conversations, waiting for the one that matched the memory. He knew it was a long shot, maybe even impossible, but he also knew what it felt like to be pulled from death by a boy who never asked for thanks. And if there was a chance, just one, that the boy still lived here, Keanu was going to find him, even if he had to reopen every memory to do it. On the third week of renovations, Keanu sat alone in the back office of the toy store. It used to be Mr. Callahan's inventory room, filled with old boxes, ledgers, and outdated catalogs. Now it served as Keanu's quiet refuge. The window faced the alley, where nobody passed. The only sound was the steady hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional laughter from kids walking by after school. He opened a drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside was the only photograph he had from that night. It wasn't from the crash. It had been taken days later after his hospital release. A film crew member had snapped it when Keanu returned to the scene to lay flowers. In the image, a younger Keanu stood at the crash site, staring down the embankment. And beside him, just barely caught in the corner of the frame, was a boy. He was holding a flashlight, his face turned slightly to the camera, shadowed, half obscured by a hood. But the shape of his eyes, the quiet strength in his posture, it burned itself into Keanu's mind. For years, he had studied that photograph like scripture. It gave him hope. It reminded him he hadn't imagined it all. He had tried to enhance the photo digitally. It didn't help. The image remained blurry. No facial recognition software could match it. It remained a ghost, a clue without a name. But now, every time he saw a boy walk into the store, Keanu paid attention, not in a strange or intrusive way, just enough to catch their age, their eyes, the way they moved. Maybe the boy had moved away. Maybe he'd grown up and left this place behind. But maybe, just maybe, he'd stayed. One afternoon, Keanu asked Mr. Callahan in a casual tone, "Do you remember a boy, maybe 12 or 13, who used to come in years ago, always carried a flashlight?" Mr. Callahan had chuckled. "That could be half the kids who came in back then." Flashlights were a big deal, especially those ones that clipped onto belts. But one who was quiet, real quiet, always wore a raincoat. Even when it wasn't raining. Callahan tilted his head. "Now that you mention it, there was a kid. Didn't talk much, lived with his grandma out near the East Ridge. Walked into town almost every weekend. Always bought batteries, never toys. Said his flashlight had to stay ready." Keanu's pulse skipped. "Do you remember his name?" Callahan frowned, digging through the back of his memory. Something with a J. Jeremy? Jonah? No, not Jonah. It was Jasper. That's it. Jasper Ward. Keanu nodded slowly, his mind already racing. Jasper Ward. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had in 2 decades. He scribbled the name down, then tucked the paper into the photo. And for the first time since he stepped foot in Fairgrove, Keanu felt something shift in his chest. He wasn't just chasing a memory anymore. He had a name, and that changed everything. The morning sun rose gently over Fairgrove's downtown, casting soft gold across the brick buildings and sleepy sidewalks. A new wooden sign hung outside the toy store, freshly painted in deep navy blue with white letters carved by hand. It read simply, "Callahan's Toy Haven, Est 1963. Reimagined 2025. There were no banners, no press releases, no advertisements. Dear. Just a quiet door unlocked at 8:00 a.m. Inside, the transformation was undeniable. Wooden shelves gleamed with fresh polish, stocked with toys that didn't blink or buzz but invited imagination. Handcrafted wooden puzzles, rag dolls with stitched smiles, cast iron trains restored to perfection. The scent of cedar and old stories floated in the air. Keanu, wearing a simple apron with the name KC stitched in red thread, stood behind the counter as the first customers trickled in. No one recognized him. The beard helped. So did the baseball cap pulled low. But mostly, it was because people weren't looking for a movie star in a toy store. They were looking for joy. A mother led her two daughters in, their eyes wide. One clutched a crumpled dollar bill. The other gasped when she saw a miniature carousel spinning gently in the corner. "Welcome in," Keanu said softly. The girls giggled and ran off toward the dollhouse section. By noon, word had spread. Kids on bikes arrived in clusters. A father who once came here as a boy brought his own son. Teachers stopped by on their lunch break. Someone left a note at the counter. "We thought this place was gone forever. Thank you for bringing it back." Keanu read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer next to the register. He didn't speak much, just offered smiles, helped find the right toy, and rang up purchases with steady calm. When asked if he was the new owner, he shook his head. "Just helping out," he'd say. That evening, after the final customer had left, Keanu walked through the aisles in silence. The lights dimmed, the silence thick with history and healing. He sat on the wooden bench near the back window, looking out at the street, sipping warm tea. The photo of the boy, Jasper Ward, was folded in his back pocket. He hadn't shown it to anyone. Not yet. He didn't need to. If fate worked the way he believed it did, the boy would walk in on his own. And then it happened. 3 days later, just after lunch, the door creaked open. Keanu didn't look up at first. He was helping a child fit a puzzle piece into a wooden map of the United States. Then something about the footsteps caught his ear. Not rushed, not hesitant, just familiar. He turned. The man who walked through the door wasn't a boy anymore. He stood over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a face carved by time. But the eyes, those eyes were exactly the same. Jasper Ward. Keanu froze, puzzle piece still in his hand. He wanted to speak, to call out the name. But something held him still. Jasper looked around slowly, his expression calm, almost nostalgic. And then his eyes met Keanu's. For a long second, the two men simply stared at each other. Jasper gave a polite nod, the kind you'd give any shop clerk in a small-town store. Then he turned his attention to the shelves, his eyes scanning the inventory with quiet curiosity. Keanu's heart pounded. He hadn't felt this unsteady since that night on the mountain road, but he kept still, letting Jasper move through the store on his own terms. The young man didn't seem to recognize him, at least, not yet. Jasper stopped near the back wall, where a collection of classic toys stood arranged in a display. He picked up a wooden fire truck and turned it over in his hands. A soft smile crossed his face. "My grandfather had one just like this," he said out loud, not looking at Keanu. Keanu walked slowly over, keeping his tone light. "That model's from the early 70s, restored by hand." Jasper nodded. "Feels like it." He set the truck down gently. "Didn't expect to find something like this here. Place used to be falling apart." "It was," Keanu replied. "Not anymore." Jasper glanced sideways at him, curiosity flickering again. "You from around here?" he asked. Keanu hesitated. "No, just passing through. Thought I'd help out." Jasper gave a half smile. "You don't sound like someone just passing through." Keanu looked down at the display. "Sometimes A place calls you back, even if you never lived there. There was a silence, not awkward, just full. Jasper eventually moved toward the front again, eyes sweeping the rows of toys, the handmade kites, the alphabet blocks. Then he paused by the counter. "My mom used to bring me here when I was little," he said, before she passed. "I remember the smell of the wood and the way the bell sounded when the door opened. It's weird. It still sounds the same." Keanu nodded. "Some things are worth keeping the same." Jasper's face softened. "It's good what you've done, whoever you are." Keanu smiled faintly. "Just KC." Jasper extended a hand. "Jasper." They shook. A moment passed. Jasper didn't flinch. No flash of recognition, no sign that he saw Keanu as anyone but a quiet man behind a counter. That realization hit harder than Keanu expected. "Nice to meet you," Jasper said, then glanced at his watch. "I've got to get to work, but I'll be back. This place feels like a memory I didn't know I missed." Keanu watched him go. The bell rang as the door closed behind him. He stood there, hand still resting on the counter, listening to the echo fade. Then, almost reflexively, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo again. His younger self, soaked and shaken, and the boy, Jasper, holding the flashlight in the rain. Keanu stared at it for a long time. He whispered, "It's really you." The next morning, Keanu arrived early. The store lights buzzed softly as he unlocked the front door and stepped inside. He ran his hand over the counter, the wood smooth and worn in just the right way. The shelves were full, the toys arranged with care. It looked like something out of time, preserved not for nostalgia, but for hope. He went to the back and checked inventory, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Jasper had said he'd be back. Keanu didn't know when, or what would happen when he returned, but something told him the real story was only just beginning. By noon, the store was bustling. A group of kids ran to the marble track sets, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Two elderly women browsed the puzzles, reminiscing about ones they had bought here decades ago. Keanu helped a mother choose a handcrafted music box for her daughter's birthday. And in all of it, he remained KC, just the quiet man helping others find joy again. Then, just after the late afternoon rush thinned out, the bell rang again. Jasper walked in. This time, he carried a canvas messenger bag slung across his shoulder and a small cardboard box in his hands. "Hey," he said casually. "I thought about what you said yesterday, about some places calling you back." Keanu nodded, meeting his gaze. "And?" Jasper placed the box on the counter. "Found this in our attic. Thought maybe you'd want to see." Keanu opened it carefully. Inside were a few small toys, weathered, faded, but unmistakably from the store decades ago. And tucked among them was a folded paper. Keanu unfolded it slowly. It was a receipt, barely legible, dated 1999. On the bottom corner, scrawled in a child's handwriting, was the name Jasper R. Fulton. "My mom let me buy a train set here the week before she died," Jasper said quietly. "I guess I just wanted you to know this place mattered, long before it got fixed." Keanu looked at the receipt, then up at Jasper. His throat tightened. "It still matters," he said. Jasper smiled. "So, KC, how'd you end up here, really?" Keanu paused. The truth danced just behind his tongue. But something told him it wasn't time. Not yet. "I guess I was looking for something," Keanu said. "And this store helped me remember why people still believe in small miracles." Jasper nodded. "Well, if you ever need a part-timer, I know my way around a toy aisle." Keanu extended his hand again. "You're hired." Jasper grinned. "No interview? I think you already passed it." As Jasper moved behind the counter, helping restock a shelf, Keanu quietly stepped into the back room. He placed the photo of the rainy night on the table beside Jasper's receipt. He stared at both, letting the truth settle deeper inside. It was him. The boy who saved his life had returned, and now Keanu had a second chance to return the favor. The day after Jasper dropped off the receipt, Keanu arrived early again. The sky outside was pale, not yet awake, and the toy store was still. He flipped the sign to "Open," clicked on the lights, and went through his usual rhythm, straightening boxes, tuning the tiny music box display, and adjusting the train track loop on the floor near the back window. He was halfway through organizing the vintage metal robots when the bell rang again. Keanu looked up. It wasn't Jasper. It was a young man, early 20s, tall, lean, with worn boots and a hoodie faded from the sun. He paused just inside the doorway, blinking like someone who hadn't seen magic in a long time. Keanu's heart gave a small jolt. The walk, the slight limp in the right leg, the sharp, curious gaze. Then, as the stranger turned slightly to study a wooden slingshot display, Keanu saw it. A thin scar running down the inside of his left wrist. It couldn't be. The boy from the storm. The one with the flashlight. The one who vanished. The young man began to wander, brushing dust off the shelves gently with his sleeve as he went. His fingers lingered on a wooden chessboard, then a tin rocket. Then, slowly, he walked to the counter. "Hi," he said, voice even, a little quiet. "Is the owner around?" Keanu nodded, keeping his breath steady. "You're looking at him." The young man hesitated, then extended a hand. "Name's Eli. Eli Ward." Keanu took it. He was warm, firm, human. "Nice to meet you, Eli," Keanu replied. "What brings you in today?" Eli shrugged. "Was just walking by, saw the lights. I remember this place from when I was little. Didn't think it was still open." "It just reopened," Keanu said, offering a smile. "Trying to bring it back to life." Eli's gaze flicked around the store again. "It's peaceful. I like it." Then he hesitated. "I'm actually looking for work. Anything, really. I'm good with fixing stuff. If you need help stocking, cleaning, I'll take anything." Keanu studied him. The worn backpack, the patched jeans, the cautious way he stood, as if afraid to be turned away again. "How soon can you start?" Keanu asked gently. Eli blinked. "You serious?" "I don't joke about needing help." "I can start today," Eli said quickly. "Right now, if you want." Keanu nodded. "There's a stack of inventory in the back room that needs sorting. Think you're up for it?" Eli grinned. "Absolutely." As Eli disappeared through the swinging door behind the counter, Keanu stood there for a moment, his hands resting lightly on the old oak surface. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. The boy who had once pulled him from a wrecked car and vanished into the dark was now here, in this very store, asking for a second chance at something he never even got a first shot at. And Keanu, for the first time in a long while, felt the gears of fate click quietly into place. By noon, Eli had already reorganized half the back room. The boxes were neatly stacked, the labels rewritten in blocky capital letters, and the old shelves, long bowed under the weight of disarray, now stood balanced and orderly. Keanu watched from the doorway, arms crossed, letting the quiet sounds of effort fill the air. Eli moved like someone who had done hard things in his life. Not with speed, but with intention. Every motion had weight and silence, the kind that only came from pain. During their short lunch break, Keanu brewed coffee in a dented steel kettle and offered Eli a sandwich from the small fridge in the back. They sat on overturned crates, the air thick with varnish and dust. "So, where are you from?" Keanu asked casually. Eli chewed for a moment, then wiped his hands. "Nowhere, really. Grew up bouncing between towns. Mom worked diner jobs, mostly. We were always just trying to stay a step ahead of getting kicked out." Keanu nodded, his eyes steady. "That sounds tough." Eli gave a small laugh, not bitter, just tired. "Yeah, but I guess you get used to it after a while." "What about now?" Keanu asked. "You staying in town?" "For now," Eli replied. "Got a room above the old hardware shop. Mr. Torres lets me stay, cheap. Said he remembers me when I was a kid." Keanu smiled at that name. "He's a good man." "Yeah," Eli said softly, staring into his cup. "One of the few." Keanu didn't press further. He didn't ask about Eli's father, or the scar, or why a young man with such kindness in his voice spoke like someone who didn't expect kindness back. Instead, he said, "You doing good work here?" Eli looked up, surprised. "Thanks. It feels nice, like the kind of place that matters to people." "It does," Keanu said. "It used to. Maybe it still can." Eli looked around the store again, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "You fixed all this yourself?" "With a little help," Keanu said. "And a lot of quiet hours. You're not what I expected from a toy store owner." Keanu chuckled. "I get that a lot." A silence passed, but this time it was softer. Eli finally broke it. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why'd you hire me? I mean, no resume, no references. You didn't even know me." Keanu met his gaze. "Sometimes you just know someone deserves a chance." Eli didn't say anything right away. Then he nodded, very blunt. "Well, thank you. I won't waste it." As the sun dipped lower and the golden light filtered through the glass panes, Keanu stepped outside for a moment. He leaned against the brick wall of the shop, looking up at the pale blue sky. He felt it again, that same strange tug he'd carried for 2 decades. Only now, the boy had a name, and Keanu had a reason to stay. In the days that followed, Eli settled into the rhythm of the toy store with a quiet grace. He arrived early, stayed late, and never left a mess behind. Customers began to warm up to him quickly, especially the children, who laughed easily when he made up stories about the toys on the shelves. "This one," he told a boy one afternoon, holding up a dented robot, "once stopped a spaceship from falling into a black hole. Barely made it out." The boy gasped, and Eli winked. "So be gentle with him, all right?" Keanu watched from the counter. There was something healing in the way Eli connected with the kids, something he couldn't put into words. But more than once, he saw Eli glance toward the exit when the bell rang, as if expecting something, or someone, to come through that door. And there was always a flicker of disappointment when they didn't. Late one evening, after closing, Keanu sat with Eli in the break room. The store was quiet. The streetlights cast a soft yellow hue through the front windows. Eli finally opened up a little more. "My mom passed when I was 19, he said softly. "Liver failure. She'd been sick a long time, but never let me see it." Keanu's voice was gentle. That's hard. We worked double shifts to pay rent. Never complained. She didn't trust many people, but she believed in doing the right thing, even when it didn't pay off." Keanu nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I remember once," Eli continued, "we were walking home during a thunderstorm, just the two of us, soaked to the bone. And there was a car off the road. She said, 'We stop, always.'" Keanu's breath caught. Eli kept talking, unaware of the storm he'd stirred in Keanu's memory. "She made me help. The man in the car was barely breathing. I was just a kid, but I helped pull him out. We never stayed long enough to be thanked. She said it wasn't about that." Keanu stared at him. "And you don't remember who the man was?" Eli shook his head. "No. I just remember his face was bloody and the car smelled like gasoline." Keanu leaned back slowly, staring at the ceiling. The pieces were fitting together. That night, the boy, the flashlight, the hands that pulled him from the crumpled steel. It was Eli, but he didn't remember. And Keanu wasn't ready to tell him. Not yet. For now, he just said, "Your mom sounds like someone I wish I'd met." Eli smiled. "She would have liked you." Outside, a breeze stirred fallen leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, In the quiet glow of the toy store's back room, something long lost had quietly returned. Not recognition, but trust, and it was just beginning. The store had never been livelier. Children's laughter bounced off the vintage wooden shelves, the soft hum of the old ceiling fan blending with the clinking of toy train tracks and the rustle of paper kites. Keanu often watched quietly from behind the counter, his apron smudged with paint and sawdust. But his eyes weren't on the toys. They were on Eli. Eli Ward was a natural with kids. He knelt down to their level, listened like their words mattered, and never once rushed them. He fixed broken doll joints with the patience of a surgeon, showed little boys how to rewind wind-up cars, and even built a puppet stage from scratch in the reading corner. Parents loved him. Kids adored him. But when the store closed for the night, the smile faded. Keanu had noticed it the first week. Eli would linger by the door, pretending to check the locks. Then he'd walk to the edge of the block, slip into the old red pickup truck parked near the alley, and disappear behind tinted windows. One night, Keanu quietly followed and stood just far enough away to see Eli curl up in the driver's seat under a threadbare blanket. The next morning, Keanu brewed 2 cups of coffee instead of 1 and waited. Eli showed up exactly on time, as always. His eyes were puffy, his shirt was wrinkled, and there was a fresh cut on the back of his hand. He tried to hide it, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pocket. "Rough night?" Keanu asked gently. Eli shrugged. "Didn't sleep much, truck heater's busted." Keanu nodded. He didn't press. Instead, he offered the second cup of coffee and said, "We're low on inventory in the back room. Want to help me reorganize it later?" Eli agreed. They worked side by side in silence for hours that day, sorting boxes of vintage figurines and half-assembled puzzles. But it was when Eli reached for a high shelf and winced that Keanu noticed the bruises. Yellow, purple, healing awkwardly along the ribs. Something inside Keanu sank. He didn't say anything then. He just passed Eli the box he was reaching for and let the silence fill the space between them. That night, Keanu sat in the office alone, staring at the old photo again. The boy in the rain, the flashlight, the scar. He was almost certain now. Eli Ward wasn't just a good kid. He was that kid. But life hadn't repaid his heroism with kindness. The next morning, Keanu waited until Eli arrived before speaking again. "You ever think about staying somewhere warmer than a truck?" he asked casually. Eli stiffened. "Did someone say something?" "No," Keanu said softly. "I just noticed. We've got a decent back room. Clean, quiet, no rent, no strings." Eli looked at him, surprised. "Why?" Keanu met his gaze. "Because you deserve better." Eli didn't answer right away. He looked down at the scuffed floorboards like they might offer clarity. The muscles in his jaw tensed, then softened. Finally, he nodded. "Just for a few nights," he said, "until I figure things out." Keanu offered a quiet smile. "Take all the time you need." That evening, after the last child had left and the front door was locked, Keanu led Eli into the back room. It had once been a cluttered storage space, but Keanu had cleared it out during the renovation. Now there was a small bed in the corner with folded blankets, a desk with a reading lamp, and a mini fridge humming softly beneath the window. Eli stepped inside cautiously, as though expecting it to vanish. His fingers brushed the worn edge of the nightstand, then traced the corner of the bookshelf. A small wooden toy soldier sat there, hand-painted with chipped detail. "You fixed this one," Keanu said, nodding to it. "First week you were here." Eli picked it up slowly. "I thought you'd thrown it out." "Nope," Keanu said. "Thought you might want a reminder of how good you are at building things." Eli didn't speak. He just stood there for a long moment, clutching the toy, his back to the door. When he finally turned around, his eyes were misty. "Thanks," he said, almost a whisper. Keanu gave him privacy that night, locking the front and heading upstairs to his own modest room above the store. But sleep didn't come easy. He kept thinking about the bruises, the guarded way Eli moved, the haunted look that surfaced when someone touched on family. The next few days brought small changes. Eli's smile grew a little more real. He shaved. He stopped flinching when customers raised their voices. He started whistling softly while stocking shelves. But even then, Keanu noticed he always kept his duffel bag packed by the bed, never fully settling in. Late one night, Keanu heard movement downstairs. He crept to the stairwell and saw Eli at the front counter, holding a photograph. Keanu paused in the shadows, watching. Eli traced the edge of the picture with his thumb. It was of a woman, young, with long dark hair and a tired smile. She was holding a baby wrapped in a red blanket. Keanu didn't move. He knew, without asking, that it was Eli's mother. "I still don't know where she went," Eli said aloud, not knowing anyone was listening. "One day she just didn't come home." Keanu stepped into the light. "How old were you?" Eli didn't flinch. He just stared at the photo. "6, he said. "Foster care took me in the next day." Keanu nodded. He didn't offer pity, just presence. "That red blanket," he said, gently pointing. "You still have it." Eli smiled faintly. "It's in my duffel. Can't sleep without it." Keanu looked at the boy before him, grown now but still carrying the weight of abandonment. And in that moment, he knew. He wasn't just giving Eli a bed. He was giving him something that had been missing for 20 years. Hey. In the following weeks, the toy store thrived with a quiet kind of magic. Children laughed, parents lingered, but behind the scenes, something deeper was unfolding. Keanu didn't push Eli to talk more about his past. He just showed up. Every day, with warmth, with food, with space. They painted a new mural on the side wall together, a collage of stars and wooden animals. Eli added a lighthouse to it without saying why. Keanu noticed, but didn't ask. But healing has a rhythm, and sometimes it plays a discordant note. One afternoon, a customer slammed the door loudly on his way out after arguing about a refund. The bang echoed through the shop. Eli dropped the box he was holding. His hands trembled. Keanu crouched beside him. "You okay?" Eli's voice cracked. "Just a box." But his eyes told the truth. That sound, doors slamming, voices rising, wasn't just a noise to him. It was a trigger, a flashback. That night, Eli didn't eat. He stayed in the back, sitting on the floor with the red blanket pulled over his shoulders like armor. Keanu sat across from him, sipping tea from a paper cup. "I used to sleep in a tent behind a gas station," Eli said suddenly. "Told myself it was an adventure." Keanu nodded. "Did it help?" "Some nights." They sat there in silence for a while. Then Eli looked up. "Where are you helping me?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Keanu leaned back against the wall. "Maybe not," he said. "But I know what it feels like to carry pain too long. And I know what it means when someone finally sees you." Eli's lip quivered, but he nodded. Something shifted after that. Eli began helping organize story time for the kids. He carved small wooden figures in the evenings and painted them with bright colors. One night, he asked Keanu if they could add a reading nook for quiet kids. "That's a great idea," Keanu said. "Let's build it together." And they did. They sanded the wood, painted it navy blue, and added glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Eli hung a small sign that read, "Safe Space." Keanu saw the change, not just in Eli's eyes, but in his posture, in the way he stood taller, spoke louder, smiled more. And yet every time the front door jingled, Keanu looked up just a little too quickly, because he hadn't told Eli the truth yet. He hadn't said, "You saved my life." He hadn't said, "That night, in the rain, you pulled me out of the wreck." He was waiting for the right moment, for the right words. But he knew it was coming. because sometimes the past returns, not to haunt you, but to heal you. The old filing cabinet in the back of the toy store had been untouched for years. Dust lined its handles, and the paper inside smelled of ink and time. Keanu sat cross-legged on the floor one evening, pulling file after file, gently brushing off the grime. Mr. Callahan had kept meticulous records. Receipts, school fundraiser forms, even volunteer applications from decades ago. It was tedious work, but Keanu wasn't looking for numbers. He was looking for a name. And then he found it. An faded newsletter from the local elementary school, dated 20 years ago. On the last page, under a Student of the Week column, the name jumped out: Eli Ward. Next to it was a tiny black and white photo of a smiling boy holding a certificate. The caption read, "For bravery shown in helping others." Keanu's breath caught. The date on the newsletter matched the week of his accident. He carefully tucked the page into his journal, heart pounding. Later that night, he went to the local library. The building had changed little since his last visit 2 decades ago. He asked the librarian if any children's library cards from that time might still be in their system. She laughed, until he explained why. Then she nodded. They didn't have digital records from that far back, but after an hour of searching in the archives, the librarian returned with a small, yellowed card. Eli Ward, it read, in neat block letters, written by a child's hand. Below that, the signature of a parent or guardian, Monica Ward. Keanu stood there for a long time. The pieces were beginning to fit. The next morning, he stopped by a local thrift shop. In a dusty bin of discarded toys, he found what he was looking for: a small red fire truck with a chipped ladder and faded wheels. It was the exact model Eli had been holding the night of the rescue. Keanu remembered it like a snapshot, how the boy had clutched it in one hand while pulling at the car door with the other. Back at the toy store after hours, Keanu didn't say a word. He left the fire truck on the front counter. Eli arrived early the next day, as always. He walked in, wiping sleep from his eyes, backpack slung over one shoulder. He greeted Keanu with a nod, then froze. His eyes landed on the toy truck. For a moment, everything went still. He stepped closer, picked it up, stared. Then he whispered almost to himself, I had this exact truck." Keanu didn't respond. He just watched, gently. Eli ran his thumb along the chipped ladder. "I haven't seen one of these since that night in the woods," he said quietly. The silence between them deepened. Eli turned the toy over in his hands like it held a secret he hadn't remembered he was keeping. His brows furrowed, as if he were trying to pull something out of the fog. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then he looked up, slowly. "There was a car," he said softly. "Off the road. It was raining. I was little." Keanu's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't speak. He let the moment open on its own. "I remember the headlights," Eli continued, still staring at the toy. "One was broken. There was steam. I heard someone groaning, and He paused, struggling. "I think I climbed down the embankment. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just looking for help." Eli finally set the truck down. His voice lowered. "I never told anyone, not even the foster family I was with. I thought maybe it was a dream, or maybe I imagined it. They didn't listen to me back then anyway." Keanu swallowed, but still said nothing. He didn't want to cloud Eli's memory with expectations. He just nodded gently and gestured for Eli to continue if he wanted. Eli rubbed a scar on his wrist, unconsciously. "I cut myself on glass trying to open the door. I remember that. And the person inside? I didn't know who it was. I think I yelled for help after I pulled him out. Then I ran because I thought I'd get in trouble." He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. "That's all I remember. I've tried not to think about it for years." Keanu finally spoke, softly. "What made you go down there?" Eli glanced up, confused by the question. "I don't know," I guess I just couldn't ignore it. Keanu gave the faintest smile, one born from gratitude so deep it had turned quiet. He stepped forward, placed a hand gently on Eli's shoulder. "You didn't imagine it," he said. "And you didn't get in trouble. You saved someone that night." Eli looked stunned. "What?" Keanu nodded. "It was me." Eli stepped back, blinking, as if trying to process what he'd just heard. "You?" "The car you found, that was mine," Keanu said. "It had slid off the road during a shoot. I was trapped inside. No one else knew where I was. You got me out. You saved my life." The room filled with stillness again, but this time, it pulsed with realization. Eli's hands trembled. "But I'm just someone who never forgot," Keanu replied gently. "And I've been looking for you ever since." Eli didn't speak. He sat down slowly on the edge of the checkout counter, the fire truck still beside him. His face was pale, his expression somewhere between awe and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Tears welled quietly in his eyes. Eli wiped his face quickly, embarrassed. But Keanu didn't move, didn't flinch. He gave Eli space, letting him process the weight of it all. The truth, the recognition, the years of not knowing if what he'd done mattered, or even really happened. Keanu finally said, "I didn't see your face clearly that night, but I remembered your voice, and I remembered the flashlight. You kept it pointed at me while you pulled me out, even when it shook in your hand." Eli managed a half laugh, still wiping his eyes. "I was terrified. I thought you were going to die." "I almost did," Keanu said gently, "but you didn't let me." There was a long pause. Then Eli asked, "Why now? Why this store?" Keanu walked over to the small desk in the corner. He pulled open a drawer and retrieved a folded newspaper clipping and an old map with marks along the mountain road. "I've been trying to find the town ever since," he said. "I traced hospital records, news coverage, weather reports, anything that could point me back. It took years. And when I finally figured it out, I came quietly. I didn't want a spectacle. I just wanted to fix something, and maybe find you." Eli looked down again, trying to understand what this meant for him. "But I didn't do anything special. I was just a scared kid." "No," Keanu said, his voice firm. "You were a scared kid who didn't run away from someone in need. That's rare. That's everything." The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was full of connection, of history coming full circle, of two lives, once joined by a single act of courage, finally finding their way back to each other. After a long moment, Eli stood up. He walked slowly to the back of the store and looked around at the shelves, the repaired toys, the fresh paint. "This place, it feels different now, like it matters again." Keanu nodded. "It always did." Eli turned to him, something new in his expression. Confidence, maybe. Or peace. "What happens now?" Keanu gave a small smile. "Whatever you want. I didn't come to take anything from you, Eli. I came to thank you, and to offer you the chance to build something here. For yourself, for others." Eli looked around again, his gaze lingering on the little fire truck. Then he took a deep breath and said, "Then I guess it's time I stop hiding and start living." Keanu extended his hand. Eli took it. Eli hadn't planned to fall asleep in the back room, but the weight of the day pressed too hard on his shoulders. Surrounded by shelves of vintage puzzles and rocking horses, he finally let himself drift off on the old cot Keanu had brought in. But sleep didn't come gently. That night, something stirred. In the middle of the night, Eli jolted upright, sweat streaking his brow. His chest heaved, his hands trembled. He looked around in confusion. The room was dim, shadows cast by a small desk lamp flickering against the walls. He couldn't catch his breath. Keanu, who had fallen asleep reading in the next room, heard the stifled cry and came quietly. He stepped into the doorway and found Eli sitting up, fists clenched at his knees, eyes staring ahead at something only he could see. Keanu didn't speak. He sat down on the floor beside the cot, back against the wall. The silence between them was not empty. It was respectful, grounding. Eli finally spoke, voice barely audible. "There was a man. In a car. Rain was everywhere. I was soaked. I couldn't see his face, just blood. I pulled." He stopped, wiping his face. "I thought it was a dream. Just something my brain made up to survive everything else." Keanu turned his head slightly. "It wasn't." Eli blinked. "What?" Keanu nodded. "That night was real. You were just a boy. You were the one who saved me." Eli's face twisted with disbelief. "That was you?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Yes." Eli stood abruptly, pacing. No, I didn't. How do you know it was me?" "I've spent years looking. I traced reports, records, found a school slip with your name from the same week. I even kept the toy fire truck. You had it that night." Eli ran a hand through his hair. "I was just trying to help. Nobody came. I was scared. I thought maybe I'd get in trouble, so I ran. I didn't even wait for the ambulance." Keanu stood slowly. "You were 6, and you saved a stranger's life. That's not something to be ashamed of, Eli. That's something to remember." Eli lowered himself back onto the cot, the fight draining from his body. "I didn't think it mattered. I thought it was just something small, like all the other things I did that no one saw." Keanu crouched in front of him. "It mattered. More than you'll ever know." Eli looked away. "So, why now? Why the toy store?" Keanu gave a faint smile. "Because it's the only thing I could think to do that might bring you back. I didn't know if I'd find you, but I had to try." Eli's eyes brimmed with tears. He didn't let fall. "I've felt invisible my whole life. Like I disappeared that night and never came back." Keanu put a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You didn't disappear. You saved someone. And now, maybe, it's time for someone to save you." The silence returned. Not empty. Just full of something neither of them had words for yet. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds with unusual warmth, casting a soft golden hue over the front window of the toy store. Eli stood in the center aisle, holding the small fire truck in both hands. His fingers traced the chipped red paint, the worn rubber wheels, and the faded ladder that still extended if you coaxed it gently. He didn't speak for a while. Keanu worked quietly beside him, dusting a shelf of wooden alphabet blocks. The unspoken moment between them lingered like music without sound. "I used to pretend it was real," Eli finally said. "That I was riding in it, saving people." "You did," Keanu answered without hesitation. Eli looked at him. His eyes weren't haunted this morning. They were just tired. "Why didn't anyone ever look for me?" Keanu set down the brush and turned. "I did. I asked around, but there was no record, no name. You disappeared that night. Your foster file only mentioned the school transfer, not the rescue." Eli exhaled, shaking his head. "Makes sense. I went through 5 homes that year. No one ever asked where I came from, just where I'd be sent next." Keanu stepped closer, not to console but to connect. "And yet, in all that chaos, you found the strength to help someone else." Eli nodded slowly, the edges of memory sharpening into painful clarity. "I remember now. Your hand. It was bleeding. You tried to say something. I couldn't hear it. I just pulled and ran. You said something," Keanu said. "You said..." Eli's voice cracked. "I didn't know if it worked." "It did." They stood in silence again, this time not broken or anxious, just full of breath, full of weight. Keanu placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. Not as an actor, not as a man with fame, but as someone who had been waiting 2 decades to say thank you. "I didn't want you to find me like this," Eli admitted. "Living in a truck, barely holding it together." Keanu's tone was gentle but firm. "I didn't find you like this. I found you the night you saved a life and ran before anyone could take the credit from you." Eli wiped his eyes and smiled through the ache. "So now what? You give me a medal? A plaque?" "No," Keanu replied. "I give you a job, a home, and a future you get to build." Eli looked around the store. Children's laughter filtered through the windows as local families began to arrive. "Why this place?" he asked. "Because it's a place where magic used to live," Keanu said, "and maybe still can." Eli nodded. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," Keanu said, with a slight grin. They opened the doors to the toy store together that morning, and for the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like a ghost walking among the living. He felt real, seen, remembered. And across the store, a little boy picked up a fire truck from the display and turned to his mother with a bright, proud grin. "Everyone, can I save someone with this?" Keanu and Eli exchanged a glance. "You already have," Eli whispered under his breath. Eli stood in the quiet of the store after closing, the photo still in his hands. His fingers traced the water-stained edge, the two faces blurred by time and age. But the moment, the one captured under a dull porch light in the rain, was becoming clearer now. The boy he had been, the man standing beside him, and now, standing in front of him again. Keanu watched him closely, but didn't speak. Not yet. Eli finally looked up, his voice soft and rough. "How long have you known it was me?" Keanu took a breath, then nodded. "From the moment you walked through that door." "But I didn't even remember it," Eli said, shaking his head. "Not really. Not until last night." "That's okay," Keanu replied. "I never forgot." Eli stared at him. "You bought this store just to find me?" Keanu nodded again. "I didn't know where else to look. I only remembered the town, and I remembered that flashlight." Eli's voice broke slightly. "Why would you go through all this trouble? For me?" Keanu stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Because that night, you gave me my life. And no one ever told you it mattered. But it did. It mattered to me." Eli lowered his head, overcome. He had spent years being told he was trouble, that he was worthless, that he wasn't needed. But here was the man whose life he had changed, telling him the opposite. Keanu reached into his back pocket and pulled out another photograph. This one laminated and folded over dozens of times. "This has been with me for 20 years, he said. "The rescue team found it in the glove box. I kept it because I knew one day I'd meet you again." Eli took the second photo. In it, the boy held the flashlight high, standing at the edge of the wreck. A fireman blurred in the background. A rain-soaked mountain road, and Keanu, barely visible, being lifted from the wreckage. Eli's hands trembled. "That's really me." "It's you," Keanu said. "It always was." Tears welled up in Eli's eyes. No one's ever looked for me like that before." "You deserve to be found," Keanu said simply. Eli sat on the edge of the old counter, head down, holding the photos like they were sacred. For a long time, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of understanding. Full of everything Eli had never heard growing up, words like, "You matter," and "You changed someone's life," and "You're not forgotten." Keanu finally sat beside him. "I didn't come here to fix your life. I came to tell you that you already saved one." Eli looked at him again, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you're Keanu Reeves." Keanu gave a soft smile. "Most days, but here, I'm just KC." They both laughed gently, the kind of laugh that comes when a burden has been lifted. Just a little, enough to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, Eli breathed deeply. The next morning, the store opened as usual. But something had shifted. Eli moved differently now. Not faster, but fuller. With purpose. With presence. There was a new steadiness to his voice when he greeted customers. A new light in his eyes when he knelt beside a child to help them reach a toy on the bottom shelf. And Keanu noticed every bit of it. They worked side by side as always, stocking, dusting, fixing the mechanical duck that had been squeaking in the corner for years. But today, Keanu reached for something from the back office. A small wooden box with a velvet-lined interior. Inside was a compass, old, polished, still working. "It was mine," Keanu said, handing it over. "I brought it with me on every movie set. It helped me find direction when things got too noisy." Eli opened it, holding the compass delicately. "You sure?" "I am now," Keanu said. "You already helped me find mine. Maybe it's time you had something to help you find yours." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he closed the box slowly and nodded, emotion gathering at the corners of his smile. Later that evening, after the customers had gone and the closed sign swung gently in the window, Eli asked if he could show Keanu something. They climbed the stairs to the attic, a space Eli had cleaned out weeks ago but never mentioned. Under the rafters, among old trunks and scattered wrapping paper, was a single blanket and a notebook. It was Eli's journal. He held it out. Keanu hesitated. "You sure?" Eli nodded. "You've shown me yours. I want you to see mine." Keanu flipped through the pages. There were entries written over years, scrawled on diner napkins, torn notebook paper, whatever Eli could find. Most were short. A few were poems. Others were just thoughts. One page read, "Sometimes I think I was born in the wrong story, but maybe I was just in the opening chapter." Keanu paused there. This is beautiful." Eli sat down on the wooden floor. "I didn't write it to be read. I wrote it to not disappear." "You haven't," Keanu said softly. "You've done the opposite." Outside, a storm began to roll in. Rain tapped on the rooftop like distant applause. Eli looked at the photo again, now framed, sitting on the shelf in the back room. It no longer haunted him. It anchored him. He turned to Keanu. "Do you think I could find her?" Keanu knew who he meant. Eli's mother. "Think we can try," he said. "If you're ready." "I am," Eli said. "For the first time, I actually am." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. There were no movie cameras, no scripts, no spotlight. Just two people, bound by a moment that neither could forget, and a future that, for once, felt like it might hold more than pain. Keanu leaned back and whispered, "You didn't just pull me from a wreck, Eli. You pulled me back into purpose." Eli looked over, eyes shining. "And you gave mine a name." The morning began quietly, just like every other. Eli swept the front stoop while Keanu arranged the wooden trains in the display window. But before the clock struck 10, something shifted in the air. It wasn't just the breeze. It was the way people paused outside the store, how their eyes widened, how phones were lifted, photos taken, whispers exchanged. By noon, the sidewalk outside was packed. Parents with kids, reporters with notepads, people holding signs. One read, "Thank you, Keanu." Another, in crayon and taped to a stick, simply said, "You saved him." Keanu stepped outside and scanned the crowd, then glanced down at his phone. A message had come in from a friend in LA. "You made the news." Attached was a link to a blog post. Keanu Reeves secretly owns toy store, hires local hero. The photo at the top showed Eli, laughing with a child, unaware of the lens. Below it, a side-by-side. Eli and a younger version of him from the rescue photo. It was undeniable. Inside, Eli stood frozen behind the register. The store was full, louder than usual, buzzing with attention. A woman approached with a notepad. "Are you Eli Ward?" she asked. "The boy who saved Keanu Reeves?" Eli didn't answer. His face paled. He stepped back, bumping into a shelf. Keanu moved in instantly, gently placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. "He's not taking questions," Keanu said calmly. "But I am?" The journalist blinked. "Then can you confirm?" Keanu nodded once. "He's the reason I'm standing here. That's all you need to know." Eli retreated to the back room. He paced, shoulders tight, breathing shallow. Fame had never been a goal. It had never even been a possibility. The eyes, the questions, the sudden exposure. It felt like being stripped open in public. Keanu joined him a few minutes later. He didn't speak at first, just sat nearby, gave Eli space. "I didn't ask for this," Eli finally said, voice cracking. "I know," Keanu replied. "I don't want to be some headline. I'm not that." "You're more than that," Keanu said. "But you don't have to prove anything, not to them, not to me. Just breathe." Eli looked at him, eyes wide with confusion. "Then why did you step out there?" Keanu smiled. "Because someone had to, and I promised I wouldn't let the world forget what you did, but I also promised to protect you." Outside, the attention kept growing. But something changed. Keanu made a statement. He told reporters the truth, that Eli was a private person, that he had no desire for fame, that the story wasn't about celebrity, it was about courage. About a boy who acted when no one else did, who expected nothing, and whose silence, for years, had been the loudest proof of humility. The tone of the coverage shifted. Headlines turned softer. Local hero shuns spotlight. Reeves honors lifesaver with privacy. And one, printed in the town's own paper, "Not broken, brave." That was the one that made Eli cry. The next morning, Keanu stood behind the register as usual, dressed in his simple KC work shirt. But something was different. There was a buzz in the air. A mother entered with her son, wide-eyed and whispering. Another man walked in, phone in hand, taking photos not of the toys, but of Keanu himself. A line had already formed outside. More than the regulars. Way more. Eli peeked through the back curtain and froze. Dozens of people packed the sidewalk, holding cameras, phones, and even printed copies of the blog article. Keanu calmly motioned for him to stay hidden for now. News vans parked down the block. A local anchor rehearsed outside, brushing wind-blown hair from her face. "This small-town toy store just became the heart of a national story," she began. "Not only is Keanu Reeves secretly funding its revival, but he hired a local man known only until recently as a drifter, now revealed to be a childhood hero." Inside, Keanu handled the crowd gently. He refused interviews, gave short thank yous, and redirected questions to the store's mission. Bringing joy to children, creating safe spaces, and reminding people of the value of small kindnesses. But Eli couldn't hide forever. Mid-afternoon, a girl named Tessa, maybe 7 years old, ran past the reporters and held out a drawing she'd made. It was of a toy firefighter, holding hands with a man in a gray shirt. "Is this you and Eli?" she asked Keanu, loud enough for everyone to hear. Keanu smiled and kneeled to her level. "That looks a lot like us, doesn't it?" Eli, still hiding behind the curtain, watched through a small crack. His stomach turned. His instincts said run, but something deeper, a tired, aching part of him, told him not to. Maybe for the first time, he didn't want to run. By the time he stepped out, the room quieted. No camera flashes, just eyes, curious, uncertain. Eli looked at Keanu, unsure what to say. Keanu gave a slight nod. "This is Eli," he said. "He's the reason I'm standing here, the reason this place exists. He saved my life once, and he didn't even know it." A reporter raised her mic. Eli, do you remember that day? Eli cleared his throat. Bits and pieces, not enough to deserve this attention. Keanu interjected gently. Sometimes it's not about what you remember, it's about what you did. Another voice, this time from a gray-haired man in the back. My grandson talks about you like a superhero now. The woman nodded. You helped him build that train set last week. He hasn't stopped smiling. And then, slowly, the crowd began to clap. Not a thunderous standing ovation, just soft, warm recognition, as if the town itself was finally rewriting its memory of who Eli was. Not the boy who was forgotten, but the man who had always mattered. Eli looked overwhelmed, but didn't flinch. He didn't run. He stood there, quietly, as the town began to see him, not through the lens of pity, but of pride. The bell above the toy store door gave its familiar soft chime as a woman stepped inside. She looked to be in her 60s, dressed plainly in a denim jacket and worn shoes, her gray hair pulled back into a loose bun. She didn't browse or greet anyone. Instead, she clutched something tightly in her hand and walked straight to the counter, where Eli stood reorganizing a shelf of wooden puzzles. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice raspy but calm. "Are you Eli Ward?" Eli looked up, puzzled. "Yes, ma'am." "Can I help you with something?" The woman hesitated, then opened her hand. A worn, yellowed envelope rested in her palm. It had creases so deep it looked like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. On the front, in faded cursive, was written, "For my son, Eli. If he ever finds me." "I knew your mother," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I was her neighbor, her friend. I've kept this letter for years, hoping someday I'd find a way to get it to you." Eli froze, his breath catching in his throat. His hand slowly reached for the envelope, but he didn't take it. "My mother?" The woman nodded. "She gave this to me just before she disappeared, told me to keep it safe. Said she didn't know what would happen, but if you ever came looking, I'd know it was meant to be." Keanu, who had been organizing inventory behind a nearby display, turned when he heard the words. He moved closer, staying silent, letting Eli decide. The room seemed to slow. With shaking hands, Eli took the envelope. He stared at it like it might vanish if he blinked. Finally, he looked up. Did she say anything else?" "She said you were brave," the woman whispered. "And kind. She said that no matter what happened to her, you'd carry that with you." Eli lowered his head. "I thought she left because she didn't want me." The woman touched his arm gently. "She loved you more than anything, but she was scared. The man she was with, he was dangerous. She didn't want to put you in more harm." Keanu stepped closer and placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You don't have to read it alone." Eli looked at him, eyes red but full of strength. "Will you read it with me?" Together they walked to the back of the store, away from the customers, into the small break room that had become Eli's temporary home. Eli sat down at the small table and opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like he was opening a piece of his heart that had long been closed. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, lined notebook paper stained slightly with age. The writing was the same as the front, and it began simply, "My dear Eli, I hope someday this finds you." Eli's lips moved as he read, but no words came out. Keanu sat beside him, listening silently, watching the tears slide down Eli's face. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to comfort him with words. He just stayed, present, steady, a quiet force beside a young man who had waited his whole life to hear from the person who had vanished without goodbye. The silence said everything. The letter was written in blue ink, shaky in places but filled with warmth. Eli took a deep breath and continued reading aloud, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry I left you. I never wanted to. You were the light in my life, the only good thing in a very dark time. But the man I was with, he changed. He wasn't always cruel, not at first. But once we moved to that small apartment, he stopped pretending. Keanu listened intently, his eyes fixed on the paper. The room was quiet except for Eli's unsteady voice and the hum of a distant toy display. I tried to protect you, Eli. Every night I tucked you in and prayed that the next morning would be better. I was scared all the time. Scared that one day I wouldn't be able to stop him from hurting you too, and when I got the chance to escape, I took it. But it meant leaving you behind. That broke me. Eli paused, lowering the page to his lap. His hands were trembling. She thought she was protecting me, he whispered, as if speaking the words made them real. Keanu nodded slowly. She was. She was doing the only thing she thought she could. Eli wiped his face and kept reading. I wanted to come back. Every day I woke up thinking I'd try, but I was ashamed, afraid you'd hate me. I started writing this letter so that if you ever found me, you'd know the truth. You were the best part of my life, Eli. I used to watch you play with your fire truck and imagine a world where we were both safe. His voice softened on that last word, safe. Keanu reached into a drawer beside him and pulled out the toy fire truck, the same one he'd left out earlier that week. He placed it gently on the table. Eli looked at it, then back at the letter. It was all connecting now. That night it rained, Eli whispered. That's when she left. I was hiding in the closet with the toy. She told me to stay there until morning. Keanu leaned forward, his tone gentle. And you did. Eli gave a small, broken laugh. Yeah, I did. I waited until it was light, then I ran. There was a long pause between them. Keanu didn't try to fill the silence. He let Eli process it, piece by piece, as if his heart were slowly stitching itself back together with each remembered moment. Eli folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. His voice was calm now, but heavier with emotion. She didn't abandon me. She was running from someone, from fear, and running toward hope, Keanu added. She believed you'd make it. Eli looked at him with eyes still red, but steadier than before. I don't know if I deserved that hope. Keanu gave a quiet smile. You earned it. They sat there, two men joined by a single letter, and a night neither had ever forgotten. And in that stillness, something long buried began to heal. The keys jingled lightly in Keanu's hand as he approached Eli with a hesitant smile. The midday sun filtered through the blinds of the toy store's front windows, casting warm strips of light across the wooden counter where Eli was carefully gluing a cracked wheel onto a toy truck. He looked up, puzzled, as Keanu set the envelope in front of him. What's this? Eli asked. Keanu didn't speak immediately. He simply pushed the envelope a little closer, then stepped back, giving Eli space. Eli opened it slowly. Inside was a legal deed, signed and stamped. A small, hand-drawn map of the town accompanied it, with a red circle around a quiet neighborhood just a few blocks away. I don't understand, Eli said, his brow furrowed. It's yours, Keanu replied. The cottage, it's in your name now. Eli blinked, confused and overwhelmed. What? No, I can't. Keanu, I can't accept that, it's too much. Keanu stepped forward again, gently but firmly. You didn't ask to save my life, you just did it. And you didn't ask for recognition, you never have. But this isn't charity, Eli. It's thanks. It's the life you earned. Eli shook his head, still stunned. But I've never owned anything. I don't even know what to do with a house. Keanu smiled. You learn, you make it your own. Paint the walls, plant something out front, invite friends over, or just rest. Whatever makes it yours. Eli's voice cracked. Why would you do all this for me? Keanu answered simply, because you matter. The silence that followed was full, not empty. Eli pressed his hand to his face, wiping away a tear. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. Once, quietly. That evening, Keanu drove him to the cottage. It wasn't big or fancy, just a one-bedroom with a small porch, a garden bed out front, and a red mailbox standing crooked like it had a history of its own. But to Eli, it was a castle. The air smelled like dust and wood and old pine trees. The door creaked as Keanu opened it for him, revealing polished floors, clean counters, and a single envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a welcome note, handwritten. "Home is where your story begins again." Eli stood in the center of the room, shoulders trembling. "I've never had a place that was mine," he whispered. Keanu nodded. "Now you do." They stood together for a moment, no need for more words. Then Eli walked over to the front door, stared at it, and smiled. "I think I want to paint this door," he said softly. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Any color in mind?" Eli's eyes lit up, just a little. "Red, like the toy fire truck I used to carry everywhere." Keanu smiled. "Perfect choice." The next morning, Eli stood on the porch of his new home, a can of bright red paint in one hand and a brush in the other. The sun was still low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet street. Birds chirped from nearby trees, and for the first time in a long while, Eli felt still. With each stroke of the brush, the door came alive. The red was bold, vibrant, unapologetic. It reminded him of being 6 years old, gripping that toy fire truck as tightly as he gripped hope. That night had changed everything. And yet for years it had sat in the back of his mind as a half-remembered dream. Now it was real. And so was this house. Keanu arrived mid-morning carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a small brown bag. He didn't speak at first, just handed Eli a cup and watched him work. "Smells like progress," Keanu said with a quiet smile. Eli chuckled softly. "Smells like fear. I keep thinking I'll wake up and this'll all be gone." Keanu sat on the porch step. "I know that feeling. But this is real. You're not dreaming. You earned this, Eli. Every piece of it." They sipped coffee in silence, watching the red paint dry. A few neighbors walked by, offering waves or warm glances. The town had shifted. Eli could feel it. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't the kid who got lost in the system, or the man who slept in his truck. He was someone who mattered. Later that afternoon, Eli began unpacking a few of his things, what little he had. A few clothes, some notebooks, an old radio. Keanu noticed how neatly he folded everything, how he took care with even the smallest items. There was reverence in the way Eli placed a cracked picture frame on the windowsill. Inside was a drawing he'd done as a child. A house, a red door, a stick figure smiling out front. Keanu stood back, letting Eli take ownership of the space. "You know," Eli said, glancing over his shoulder, "I've always been afraid of good things, like they'd be taken away if I got too close." Keanu nodded slowly. "That fear doesn't go away overnight, but every time you open this door, you're proving it wrong." Eli looked at the door again. "It's funny, I don't remember painting as a kid, but this feels familiar, like I've been waiting for this moment without knowing it." "Sometimes," Keanu replied, "life circles back, gives you a second chance to finish the story." Eli sat on the porch step next to him, the brush still in his hand. "Then I guess this is chapter 1. Keanu smiled. "And it's already better than anything I've ever filmed." They both laughed. And for the first time in years, Eli's laughter didn't sound guarded. It sounded free. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Eli stood on his new porch and watched the sky shift into a soft orange. The red door behind him glowed faintly in the fading light. He leaned against the railing, breathing in the quiet. Inside, a small lamp cast a warm glow over the living room. Keanu had left hours ago, but his presence still lingered, in the way the keys rested gently on the kitchen counter, in the folded note left on the windowsill that read simply, "Welcome home." Eli stepped inside and closed the door. He walked through each room again, not to check for flaws, but to take it in, to believe it. The floors didn't creak from weight, but from history. The walls weren't empty. They were waiting. And for once, Eli didn't feel like a guest in someone else's life. He sat on the couch and opened a small notebook. On the first page, he wrote 2 words: "Start over." Then he paused, looked at the red door once more, and smiled. He wasn't just living in a house. He was living in the first place that ever felt like it was his. Eli arrived at the toy store every morning before sunrise. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The once quiet storefront now buzzed with energy, and much of that was because of him. He began crafting small wooden animals, each one personalized for children who couldn't find their needs met in traditional toy aisles. One had larger buttons for kids with limited motor skills. Another had audio prompts for children who were visually impaired. He didn't talk much about why he did it. He just smiled when the kids lit up. Keanu watched from the back of the store. He no longer stood behind the register or unpacked boxes. Eli had taken over those duties, and more. He hosted a weekly storytime session where children sat cross-legged in a semicircle, listening as he read tales about unlikely heroes and quiet bravery. Sometimes he changed the endings to be softer, more hopeful. When asked why, Eli would simply say, "I think every story deserves a second chance." It wasn't long before parents started talking, not about Keanu. They didn't even know he was the one behind it all, but about the boy with the scar on his wrist and the gift in his heart. People whispered in grocery stores and school parking lots. They spoke about how different the town felt, how the toy store had brought something back, not just joy, but hope. One rainy afternoon, a mother came in holding her daughter's hand. The girl had a prosthetic arm and a quiet demeanor. Eli knelt beside her and asked, "What kind of toy would make you feel like a superhero?" The girl tilted her head and whispered, "One that looks like me." A week later, Eli handed her a custom action figure. It had a silver arm, just like hers, and a bright red cape. The girl didn't say a word. She just hugged him, then twirled like she could fly. Stories like that multiplied. A teen who had been skipping school showed up to volunteer. A child who had never spoken in public suddenly read aloud during story time. Local teens started stopping by after class, asking Eli if he needed help fixing old toys or painting shelves. He always said yes. Keanu knew what was happening. The store had become something more than a business. It was turning into a center for healing. Not in any official sense. There were no therapists or formal programs, but in the way a place becomes sacred simply because people feel safe in it. Eli was the reason. His presence, his gentleness, and his quiet resilience were creating ripples far beyond the walls of the shop. And Keanu? He kept his promise to stay in the background. He watched Eli transform from a silent helper to a community anchor. He saw how Eli now greeted customers by name, remembered birthdays, and carried a pocket notebook full of sketches and ideas for new toys. Every page was a reflection of the boy he once was, and the man he was becoming. Eli wasn't just fixing toys, he was helping fix lives. One afternoon, a boy named Marcus wandered into the store alone. He was 10, small for his age, with eyes that darted to every corner like he was expecting trouble. Eli greeted him with a gentle wave and gave him space. Over the next few days, Marcus kept returning, always silent, always alone. Eli noticed his shoes were worn, his hoodie too big, and his backpack nearly empty. Still, he never pried. He just offered him small things, a juice box, a place to sit, a toy he could play with while others shopped. Then one day Marcus spoke. Just one word. Why? Eli sat beside him on the floor of the reading nook. Why what? Why do you let me stay? Eli paused. Because you matter. And you don't have to buy anything to belong here. That moment changed something. Marcus began coming after school every day. He helped unpack deliveries, shelved books, and eventually started talking more. Eli gave him a notebook and told him to write whatever he wanted. Weeks later, Marcus showed him his first short story, a tale about a robot who couldn't speak but saved a planet with his kindness. Eli laminated the pages and placed them in the store's reading corner. Word of Eli's influence spread through the town, not through press or attention-seeking, just through lived experience. Teachers noticed their students were more confident. Parents whispered about the subtle changes in their children. For many of them, the toy store was no longer just a place to shop. It was a place to reconnect. Keanu was proud, though he said little. He mostly observed, tidying up when no one was watching, fixing broken cabinet hinges, sweeping corners, but every so often he'd leave something small in Eli's workspace. A handwritten quote, an old sketch, a thank you card he never signed. He wanted Eli to know he was seen, but not by the world, by someone who knew exactly how it felt to walk through it alone. As Christmas approached, the town prepared for its first community toy drive. Eli suggested the idea, and within days the store was full of donated gifts. Not all were new, some were handmade, some gently used, but all were cleaned, repaired, and wrapped by volunteers, many of whom had once been struggling themselves. The front window display was transformed into a snowy village scene, complete with tiny glowing houses and a sleigh built by Eli himself. One evening, Keanu stood at the back of the room as Eli gave a small speech. The lights were low, the crowd gathered close. Eli held a wooden angel in his hand, carved from leftover scraps of pine. "This place saved me," he said, "and I think we can help it save others too." The crowd applauded. Keanu watched as a young man who once slept in his truck now stood as a pillar of the town. It was humbling. It was beautiful. Later that night, Keanu sat outside on the curb, sipping tea from a paper cup. Eli joined him, sitting in silence for a while. Then he asked, "Did you ever think it would become this?" Keanu smiled. "I didn't know what it would become. I just knew it deserved a chance." Eli nodded, looking at the soft glow from the store windows. "Sometimes I think this town saved me more than I saved it." Keanu turned to him. "Sometimes those things are the same." They didn't need to say more. The night was quiet. The world had paused. And between them, in the hush of streetlight and gratitude, the heart of something extraordinary kept beating. Steady, strong, and full of light. The sun dipped low over the small town, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. The toy store's newly painted exterior glowed softly, but it wasn't the storefront that made people stop and stare. It was what adorned its side wall. An enormous mural, vivid and emotional. The center of it featured a young boy standing in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, holding a flashlight high above his head. His small face, drawn with care, reflected equal parts fear and courage. Behind him stood a silhouette, a man collapsed beside a smoking car, barely visible, but unmistakable in posture and form. That man was Keanu Reeves, and the boy was Eli. The mural had been a community project, spearheaded by a group of high school art students who had grown up hearing bits and pieces of the story. Now, with the truth public, they wanted to honor it in the most permanent way they could. The mural became a symbol, not just of rescue, but of unseen heroes, of people who show up in the worst moment and disappear before the world notices. Underneath the painting were 6 words in bold white letters: "Every life you touch leaves a light." It wasn't signed, no artist names, no press release, just the mural, the wall, and a growing crowd that came each day to look, to cry, or to reflect. That evening, when most of the town had gone quiet, Keanu arrived on foot. No driver, no cameras. He wore an old gray jacket and walked with his hands in his pockets. A few people driving past recognized him but said nothing. They saw his face, tired, thoughtful, and knew this was not a moment to interrupt. Keanu stood in front of the mural for several minutes. He didn't move. His eyes scanned every detail, the curve of the boy's jaw, the angle of the flashlight, the shadow of the overturned car. He took it all in. Slowly, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He knelt and unwrapped it carefully. It was a tiny toy fire truck, the same model that Eli had carried that night years ago, the same one Keanu had once left on the store counter to jog Eli's memory. He placed it gently at the base of the mural, resting it on a flat stone that had been placed like a pedestal. Then, without a word, Keanu stood and stepped back. His breath visible in the cool air, he stared at the toy for a while longer, as if saying goodbye to a piece of something he'd carried in his heart for too long. A part of him had healed, but more than that, something had been returned. A promise fulfilled. A circle closed. Across the street, a young boy on a bicycle watched quietly from behind a tree. He didn't say a word, just held his breath, watching the man who had become the town's quiet hero walk away into the dusk, heading back toward the store, leaving behind only a fire truck and the echo of gratitude. The next morning, the toy fire truck was still there. Children paused during their walks to school, pointing at it with wonder. Some parents explained the story. Others stayed silent, letting their kids form their own understanding. No one dared move the toy. It became part of the mural, an extension of the story it told. Inside the toy store, Eli noticed the subtle change in energy that morning. Customers weren't just coming to buy toys. They came with softened voices and thoughtful eyes. A mother stood with her toddler at the mural and whispered, "That boy, he saved someone when no one else was there." The toddler, holding his mom's hand, nodded solemnly, even if he didn't understand. Eli saw all of it from the front window. He hadn't yet gone to look at the mural up close. It wasn't modesty, it was fear of seeing too much, of feeling more than he could handle. But when Keanu entered from the back room and gently placed a second fire truck on the counter, a brand new one, identical to the one by the wall, Eli understood. This one wasn't for remembrance. It was for continuation. That afternoon, he finally walked out to the mural. He approached slowly, as if walking into a memory. When he saw the child's face painted on the wall, something stirred deep in his chest. He remembered the rain, the mud, the man slumped in the wreck, and he remembered running. Not out of fear, but because he had nothing else to offer after pulling the man clear. No one ever taught him to stay. He never expected it would matter. Now it did. Eli knelt beside the toy truck. He didn't touch it, just stared at it, hand trembling near his knee. Behind him, Keanu stood quietly at a distance, giving him space. And for a long moment it was just them, the mural, and the wind. A local photographer took a picture from across the street. It wasn't staged, it wasn't publicized. But that photo of Eli kneeling before his own forgotten past would later be shared nationwide, not because of who painted it, not because of Keanu Reeves, but because in a single frame, it showed something rare, what it means to be seen after years of invisibility. Eli finally stood, wiped his eyes, and turned to Keanu. "I didn't think it would feel like this," he said. Keanu smiled faintly. "Like what?" "Like closure. But also a beginning." Keanu nodded. "Best how you know it's real." That night, Keanu handed Eli a small notebook. On the cover were the words, "Stories for the Next Generation." Eli opened the first page. It was blank, but on the inside cover, in Keanu's handwriting, was a single line. "Let every toy carry a lesson. Let every child feel brave. From that moment forward, Eli began writing down the stories of the children who came into the toy store, their wishes, their ideas, their worries, and he created something new. Handmade toys inspired by those stories. Each one came with a little card that read, "For the light you are becoming." The mural outside remained untouched. But inside the toy store, Eli's spirit took over. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, like the beam of a flashlight in the dark. And Keanu? He spent more time in the back now, letting Eli lead. Letting the boy who once saved his life become the man who would go on saving others. The lights on set were softer than Keanu expected. No glaring spotlights, no buzz of a live audience. Just a quiet studio in downtown Chicago, where the air felt still and respectful. The interviewer, a seasoned host named Lila Monroe, had a reputation for gentle yet probing questions. She welcomed Keanu with a nod. No fanfare, no flashy entrance music. Just presence. He sat down across from her in a simple chair, dressed plainly in jeans and a worn blazer. The same blazer he'd worn during the toy store renovations, though no one in the studio would have guessed that. His hands were clasped in his lap, calm but ready. Lila leaned forward slightly. "Keanu," she said warmly, "you've surprised the world many times. But this? Buying a toy store in a forgotten town and helping a young man rebuild his life, this wasn't just generous. It was deeply personal. Why this store? Why this mission?" Keanu blinked slowly. The cameras were rolling. A silence filled the room. Not awkward, reverent. He didn't rush. He never did. Instead, he looked past the camera, as if searching for something beyond the set. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost like a confession. "Sometimes," he said, "the person who saves you disappears before you can say thank you." Lila's eyes flickered. Her pen paused mid-note. "So," Keanu continued, "you spend the rest of your life trying to say it in other ways?" No applause followed, no prompt from producers, just stillness. Lila didn't respond right away. She waited, let the weight of his words linger. "That night changed you," she finally said. Keanu nodded. "You were in a crash, weren't you?" she asked. "On a mountain road." He nodded again. "I've read stories," she said, "but the reports were vague. You were filming out there, late night, rainstorm. They said someone pulled you out of the wreck but disappeared before help arrived." Keanu leaned forward slightly, urgently. "Taylor weren't wrong," he said. "A boy, no older than 10 or 11. He wasn't supposed to be out there. But he was. With a flashlight, a red raincoat, and he saved me." Lila's expression softened. "You never found him." "I tried," Keanu said. "I had people look. I retraced everything. There was no name, no record, no reward claimed. Just silence. And I carried that." He paused, swallowed gently. "Years later, I passed through the town again. Nothing looked familiar. But then I saw it. This toy store. Faded, cracked windows, but something about it. It pulled me in, and I stayed." Lila whispered, "Because of him?" "Yes," Keanu said. "Because I thought, maybe I'd find him. Or maybe I'd find something that reminded me of that moment. That second chance." "And you did," she said, quietly. He nodded. "His name is Eli Ward." Lila's eyes widened slightly. "The same Eli Ward who now runs the store with you?" Keanu's gaze didn't break. "Yes." She leaned in, her voice lower, almost reverent. "Does he know everything?" "Hell does now," Keanu replied. "But for a long time, he didn't remember. Trauma has a way of stealing memory. He thought that night meant nothing. He thought no one noticed." A long pause followed. "And I had to show him it mattered," Keanu said. "That it saved a life. That it changed mine." Lila sat back for a moment, visibly moved. The crew behind the cameras didn't speak. The room was still. "Why not tell the world sooner?" she asked. Keanu shrugged gently. "Because the story wasn't mine to tell. It was his. And he had to find it, in his own time." Lila's voice broke a little. "Most people would have taken the spotlight, claimed the headline." "I've had enough headlines," Keanu said quietly. "What I needed was truth. And a way to say thank you that meant something." "And the store?" she asked. "Why a toy store?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Because it's a place of imagination, of safety, of light. And he never got to have that as a child, so now he creates it for others." Lila nodded slowly, her voice soft. "It's become something more, hasn't it?" "Yes," Keanu said. "A place where the town gathers, where people feel seen again, where broken things are fixed, and not just the toys." A tear rolled down Lila's cheek, and she didn't brush it away. "The mural," she said. "The boy with the flashlight. The rain. That was him." Keanu nodded. "And you left the fire truck at its base." "Yes." Lila took a breath. "And you walked away." "Because I didn't need to stay," Keanu said. "Eli had become the light. The town saw it. That's what mattered." Lila hesitated, then asked, "If Eli hadn't been there that night, do you think you'd still be here today?" Keanu paused. "No, I didn't." "And if you had 5 minutes to speak to him back then," she said, "what would you have said?" Keanu looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "I would have said thank you. I would have told him that even if no one ever noticed what he did, even if he vanished into the world again, it mattered. That saving someone isn't about fame. It's about grace and courage and stepping forward when no one else will." The lights on set dimmed slightly as the cameras prepared to close, but Lila held one final question in her eyes. "Keanu," she said, "what would you say to others watching this who don't believe their small acts matter?" Keanu thought for a moment, then answered, "I'd say that every life you touch leaves a light behind. You may not see where it shines, but someone will." The cameras cut. The silence held. No one clapped. No one moved. Because no one wanted to break the moment. The toy store had quieted for the night. The last of the customers had trickled out. Lights dimmed, the hum of the old ceiling fan the only sound. Keanu and Eli sat side by side behind the register, sipping from paper cups of warm tea. The soft yellow glow from the sign outside bled through the windows. A little girl's laughter echoed faintly from a recent recording playing in the background. She had spent half an hour earlier that day with a handmade sock puppet Eli designed. Her giggle had filled the store like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Keanu leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and smiled. "That sound," he said gently, tapping his chest. "That's why we're here." Eli looked over, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's the only kind of echo worth chasing." They sat in silence for a while, not the awkward kind. This was the silence between people who understood something without needing to say it out loud. It was the kind that carried more weight than words ever could. Outside, the mural on the side of the building glowed in the twilight. It depicted young Eli, soaked in rain, holding a flashlight toward the sky, his other arm reaching toward a shadowed figure crumpled beside a wrecked car. Below it were the words, "Every life you touch leaves a light." Keanu stood and walked over to the large front window. He stared at the mural for a long moment. His fingers lightly touched the glass. "I used to think you needed a spotlight to be seen," he murmured. "Turns out, a flashlight was enough." Eli joined him at the window. "I didn't know it mattered." "You saved a life," Keanu said, "and in doing that, you saved everything that came after." Eli breathed in deeply. "There's still so much I don't remember about that night. But I remember the fear. I remember thinking someone was going to die unless I did something." Keanu placed a steady hand on Eli's shoulder. "And you did." They turned away from the mural, back into the store, back to the shelves filled with wooden puzzles, hand-stitched animals, and toys carved with stories only children could invent. The store had become more than a place of play. It had become a quiet sanctuary, a space of memory, meaning, and second chances. Keanu reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, handcrafted box. He placed it in Eli's hands. "Open it." Inside was a tiny wooden token, shaped like a flame. On it, the words were carved with care. "Keeper of Light." Eli blinked, his throat tightening. "What is this?" "A reminder," Keanu said, "that even when no one saw, you lit the way." Eli didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of everything, of the past, of the future, of this moment, sat quietly between them. Outside, the last ray of daylight faded behind the hills. Eli slipped the token into his pocket, as if it belonged there all along. Keanu went to lock the front door, turning the "open" sign to "closed" with a quiet swipe of his hand. For a moment, they stood still. Just two men in the hume of aftermath, surrounded by shelves of dreams. "You ever think about how many people we pass by each day?" Keanu asked. "People we never speak to, people who could have saved us and never knew?" Eli nodded slowly. "Like ghosts in daylight." Keanu chuckled softly. "Yeah, ghosts who carried us through something, without ever hearing thank you." Eli looked down at his hands, calloused from toy making and small repairs. "All this time, I thought I was forgotten." Keanu met his eyes. "No one who brings light is ever forgotten." "Not really." They walked together to the back room, where Keanu kept an old photo pinned on the wall. The original image, the boy and the man, beside a wrecked car, had faded over the years. But its meaning hadn't. Underneath it now was a caption Eli had scribbled on a sticky note 1 week earlier. "Even when the world forgets, kindness remembers." That night, Keanu and Eli didn't say much. They didn't need to. Later, the two sat again at the front register, watching as the lights from passing cars traced soft patterns across the floor. A wind chime on the porch tinkled faintly with the breeze. Eli asked, "You ever regret not saying thank you sooner?" "All the time," Keanu said. "But life doesn't always give you the right moment. Sometimes it just gives you another chance." Eli leaned back and folded his arms. "This place, it saved me, in a way I didn't know I needed." Keanu smiled. Then maybe it was the right moment after all. Silence settled again. Not empty silence, but the full kind. The kind filled with understanding, with grace, with the small echoes of things finally healed. A child's laugh, recorded earlier, played again over the small speaker behind the register. Eli tilted his head. "Felt one," he said. "That's why we're here." Keanu nodded. Outside, the mural glowed under a street lamp. The painted boy in the rain looked eternal now. His flashlight still pointed toward something only the heart could see. Keanu stood and turned to Eli one last time that night. "How many people," he asked softly, "have saved us without even knowing it?" Eli didn't answer. Instead, he reached beneath the counter, pulled out a small puppet, and handed it to Keanu. "We make things here," he said. "But what we really do is remember people who mattered." As the lights dimmed and the shop settled for the night, the words painted on the mural outside flickered in the stillness. "Every life you touch leaves a light. And now it's your turn. If this story moved you, share it. If you believe that kindness echoes through time, even from strangers, subscribe. And tell us in the comments who's someone you've never gotten to thank. Because sometimes, the smallest moment can change a life forever.